George Crumb, American composer and teacher, and still alive. His birth date was 1929. He came from West Virginia. His father was a clarinetist. His mother was a cellist. And by the age of 10, George knew how to play flute, piano, and clarinet. He attended Mason College in West Virginia, the University of Illinois, Berlin Hochschule for Music on a Fulbright, and the University of Michigan. He was professor at the University of Colorado, the Center of Creative and Performing Arts, as well as at the University of Pennsylvania. He is now a retired University of Penn professor. But at the time he was at the University of Penn, he did come to the University of the Arts, and he coached my sister and myself on his very famous two-piano work, Music for a Summer Evening. Crumb also received a Pulitzer Prize for music in 1968 and also a Grammy in 2001. George Crumb believed that everyone had an acoustic that resonated with them based on where they grew up. His acoustic was based on echoes, reverberation, and haunting sounds of the West Virginia River Valley. Crumb also said one of his biggest influences is Debussy. And he says, and I quote, "Debussy is one of the first composers to make the sheer sound a very special aspect of music." His poetic influence was Federico Garcia Lorca. The words of this wonderful poet are used in his song cycle, Ancient Voices of Children. George Crumb is known for very many experimental ideas. One is the use of amplified instruments. Another is the use of the prepared piano, meaning the creating sounds within the piano, just like Cage, but different than Cage. He actually plays inside the piano as well as on the keyboard. And also expansive notation. This is important because a lot of times when we think of notation before this, we think of it as a score, we put it on the piano, and we're able to read it from one side to the next, and it's no problem. But in the case of George Crumb, he gets very, very creative and very symbolic. If you take a look at some of his works, as you can see on this page here, is that you have a very difficult time of reading it because it's not a traditional score. But he believes that there's something to the symbolism of putting it down as well, written and notating to accommodate certain effects. So when you actually work on a piece by Crumb, you really have to study the piece, not only because you are studying it as practicing it, but you also have to study it because you have to be able to understand it. I chose a couple of different examples for you to listen to. One is the Eine kleine Mitternacht music, which means a little midnight music, of 2001. The title was a takeoff on Mozart's Eine kleine Nacht music. The first movement is known as Nocturnal Theme. And the tune is a Thelonious Monk jazz melody called Round Midnight. The other movement I'd like you to listen to is Movement 6, which is Gollywog Revisited. And it's a takeoff on Debussy's work and reference to Tristan. Very interesting what he does with the Gollywog that we heard Debussy actually perform. The Voice of the Whale, an interesting piece composed for the New York Camerata. It was inspired by the singing of the humpback whale. It's in a three-part design: prologue, variations, and epilogue. It is written for prepared piano, flute, and cello. What's interesting is that when you see it performed, the prepared piano part also includes glass rod, paper clip, chisel. Sometimes you're singing inside of the keyboard. The flute player, the player whistles notated pitches, plays cymbals, percussive sounds into the flute. And you have the cello that does those kinds of elements as well. All of them are amplified. The instruments are amplified. And when it's performed, the performers are in half black masks surrounded by a blue light. So you have that sense of being in the water. Another work that was used actually in The Exorcist is Black Angels. It's for electric string quartet. It was completed Friday the 13th, March 1970. 13 images from the Dark Land. It's a parable of a troubled world, God versus the devil, and the Black Angel is the fallen angel. The three parts: departure or the fall from grace, absence, spiritual annihilation, and finally the return, redemption. When you listen to it, you'll notice that Crumb uses the Dies Irae. One of my favorite quotes of Crumb, and I quote, "I believe that music surpasses even language in its power to mirror the innermost recesses of the human soul," unquote. Another is, music must have a balance of technique and spirituality. One cannot exist without the other. Please make sure that you watch the Crumb interview and read his writings to better understand this living composer.